You've got your big idea. You've thought about your business proposition. You've thought about which direction you're going to go. And there's always a question that every business owner asks themselves is, where do I actually get the money from? Where am I going to fund? How am I going to fund this idea? So in tonight's show, that's what we're going to talk about. Me and my good friend, Dr. Jo North.
Hi, good to see you.
Okay.
Sorry, Mahmood. I was just saying hello as well.
Well, we are that joint hello. And listen, folks, we're going to talk to you more about the show here. If you're just coming online, before we actually dive deeper into what we're doing, it's customary at this stage of the game to dive into a bit of music.
Hi there, welcome to today's Business Growth Club show. We are so pleased to have you here. The theme is growth marketing.
We're talking about actions and consequences today.
It's all about purpose.
Driving business growth with using KPIs.
We're talking money mindset.
The Growth Club, I mean, not to oversell it, but it's so well organised. So yeah, it was totally invaluable.
The Growth Club, coupled alongside with the Masters that I'm doing at Strategic Leadership at the moment, both of those things happening collectively have definitely transformed, and the Growth Club did have a massive impact for our business.
What is it that attracted you to come to the Growth Club in the first place? Let me just start off with that.
Well, because it was the two of you, basically.
Good evening, one and all. Jo, how are you?
I'm doing really good, thank you. What have you been up to this week so far, and what have you got planned?
Oh, I was into quite a good eclectic week. So I was radio DJ yesterday on a radio show, obviously, as you would be if you're a DJ. So doing a business show there, that was pretty good going. Dealing with new clients, dealing with new members of staff. Was crazy. I actually took my other Sunday off as well. And also working on this world famous book as well, which I should talk about at some point. I've actually moved further past the idea and actually getting some stuff down.
Oh, you started writing, have you?
Yeah, I started writing. I've said too much already, but in theory, it's only been on the back burner for about, 24 years. So hopefully this year it might actually come out.
Oh, brilliant! That's fantastic. That's well, I've been what I've been doing. So lots of stuff around innovation and change facilitation. So doing some stuff in the maritime sector with technology and digital stuff, and also in the IT sector around customer experience and strategic leadership and change. So been really busy. It's been fantastic. I'm working with all sorts of small businesses from around the Yorkshire region as well, with the University of York as part of their product and process innovation programme that they offer, fully funded, which means free, for Yorkshire businesses. And you speak at that as well, don't you? So you're going to speak in a few weeks for us.
I will do. And I think that's quite pertinent, isn't it? If you've been working with all those businesses, it's quite appropriate tonight's topic on funding. In terms of where they get that money from. So look, folks, if you're just joining us on the show, by the way, let us know that you're actually there. Put a comment in there. Funding, what's your thoughts about that? We're going to share some tips, share some processes about how you go them, tell you where the money is, and whether you should actually go for it or not, as the case is.
Absolutely, a great show. And I'm going to put you in the hot seat again and just see if I can really extract all sorts of knowledge from you that's in there that you can share with us. And it's great to see Richard again. So Richard from World Max, missed you also in the last few weeks. It's really brilliant to see you. And I know you've been going through a really busy period of growth and development as well for your business. So I hope that's going well for you. I'm sure it is. So good stuff, and I'm really pleased to see you.
Be interested to get your take as we talk about funding, Richard, to share your own experiences on this one as well. If you folks are just coming onto the programme either live or later on replay, put the old hashtag replay. Again, if you've got any comments, put them in there so we know you're there, and we're happy to reach out and respond to them accordingly.
Yeah, absolutely. So the themes we're going to be talking about are actually, you do need a detailed business plan for funding, even if you're funding things yourself. Just as much as if you're looking for external funding, you need a plan. So we'll be touching on how to create one and why you need one. We'll also be thinking about how you can launch something and get things going with minimum investment and raising funding. and all sorts of different options, from doing it yourself, doing it internally from revenue, through to the external sources that are available. And also, what are the implications of some of those decisions on your wider business? So lots to talk about. Let us know what questions you've got, and any, share your experiences with us as well. That'll be awesome, because you're out there doing this as well. So it's great to hear how things have gone for you. So, I mean, we say this frequently, and it's really true, isn't it? Every business needs a business plan, and it needs a good business plan that's up to date, usable, and accessible.
Yeah, I think 100%. And it might sound quite counterintuitive, actually. There's a lot of businesses I meet that actually go for the funding first and then try and meet the business proposition to that. For me, actually, I'm not saying it's easy, but funding isn't the first consideration. If you don't have an idea what your business is going to look like, if you have no idea where the pressure points are, what you need funding for, how much you need, when you need it, it's next to impossible to go to a funder, wherever that funder is based, and say, give me some money, because they're going to ask you those same questions. So the plan comes first, the funding comes secondary to that.
Yeah, definitely. And a lot of people really procrastinate creating a business plan, or they don't get around to it, or they only sort of do one if the bank or somebody else asks them for one. But, it doesn't have to be a massively big, laborious thing, this big document. I think people think it's going to be about that thick, and it's going to take absolutely for ages. I mean, I know in the Business Growth Club, the business plan is, a really concise but punchy, incisive PowerPoint deck, isn't it? It's exactly the things you need to know, no more and no less, all put together. But why do you think people put off doing a business plan when it really helps?
I think it's probably a combo of reasons, Jo. I think it's partly misconception, because what they do, they see it as a straitjacket. They see it as, I've got to spend all this time and energy producing a document, and once it's done, it's not going to be much use to me. Secondly, I think they misunderstand what the purpose of a business plan. I think you quite rightly said that most people encounter a business plan because it's requested of them by a bank, by a funder, by a grant authority that says, before we give you any money, we need to see a business plan. And what they see that as a template, a textbook exercise they've got to populate. And for me, they're actually missing the point. They're missing the whole point of a business plan, which says journey map, destination, how do I actually get there? And if you can't articulate that clearly in the context of a business plan, then personally speaking, I think you're going to end up with a business that's going to go misshaped, and it's not going to get you where you want to.
Yeah, because without a plan, you're just making it up as you go along, and you might have to change things as you go along. Because I think as well, some entrepreneurs are commitment phobes. So they're committed to the business, but they don't want to commit anything on paper, because what happens if they change their mind, or what happens if they don't deliver it? Well, it's nobody's going to make you do anything you don't want to do, and it's you can change your mind if the situation has changed, and in fact you should change your mind sometimes if the situation changes. So yeah, just because it's on paper doesn't mean that unless you've signed everything away, you're committed to it. Really, it's about the direction that you want to go in and how you're going to get there, and what that means, so that people can get a really good understanding of your business as well as yourself. So a detailed business plan, what do funders look for when a funder, an external funder, say, looks at a business plan? What are they actually looking at? What are they trying to glean from what you're submitting?
Okay, so if you're going to an external funder, and I speak from somebody who's actually sat on assessment panels looking at people applying for funding, what I'd be looking for as a potential funder is what's called a level of risk am I taking. So when I invest in the business, when I give you private funds, when I give you money, I want to know what's the risk, what's the exposure of me actually getting my money back. So I need to understand what you're like as a business team, what skills do you bring to it? Do I know that you've actually clearly thought about your actual proposition? Have you articulated it well? So instead of saying, I'm going to advertise on social media, I want to know the detail about how you're going to do that, because that tells me you've thought through the risks. It doesn't always mean I want to see a good story, but it doesn't mean it's going to be, I'm going to make lots of profits in the early stages. If anything, I'd run a mile if somebody told me they're going to go from a standpoint of zero to massive growth within 12 months, because I'd be thinking, what basis, how are you going to get there, what's the proof? So it's first of all to give me some reassurance, is to give me some idea that I'm investing the right way, and I'm not going to evaporate. I mean, funders do take risks, by the way. So from angel investors to business accelerator programs, they take risks, but they're trying to reduce the level of risk they're undertaking to effectively a perfect stranger.
Yeah, so they've got to get that handle of the business on the business and how you work and how your thinking is. And I think it's important, I've asked people to say, I want X tens of thousands or X thousand or whatever it is, bigger, millions sometimes. Yeah. And what do you want that for? What are you going to spend that on, and what return are you going to get for it? And they can't tell you. They say, well, I want 50 grand for marketing. Well, how's that going to be spent? How are you going to measure that, and what return are you expecting from that? And they really can't tell you. It's just a number that they've created from somewhere, instead of actually doing the bottom up, finding out what's the right campaign and how much that might cost, and putting a bit of contingency in.
It's interesting to say about the commitment side of things as well, Jo. I would also add to what you said there. I think it's also they lack the commitment to actually invest time and energy of pausing, thinking through and planning and thinking ahead more than a couple of weeks there. And I mean, you wouldn't let somebody loose, would you, on a shopping expedition to say, here's an open checkbook, or here's my bank card, just go off and buy whatever you want. You'd have a shopping list, you'd have some idea what you're going to be spending. And a business is going to do the same. If you want money, where's it going to go?
I know. So there are, and I know that the fact that you're listening to this and watching this show right now, whether it's live or on replay, means you don't do this, right? Because you're interested in actually doing things the right way and the most sustainable way for your business. But I do know entrepreneurs who spend more time researching and deciding on how they're going to spend a few grand on holiday than they do on how they're going to actually use a business investment and make the most of it. So yeah, it's really important that you think this through, and a plan helps you with your own thinking. It's not just about giving information to the potential investor or lender. It's you thinking things through for yourself as well. So you've got a great business plan. It meets the criteria. But and hopefully doing that plan, you can work out how to launch with minimum investment. So, and that minimizes the time, risk and cost, doesn't it? As long as it matches the customer's expectations, as long as it's good enough to perform in the market. Any tips for that? Yeah.
Yeah, I would actually, first of all, ignore the fact of actually getting access to money. I remember hearing a story from, I think it was Cambridge Science Park a few years ago. I know they're interviewing an R&D company down there, a software company, and they were talking about the funding. And they said, actually, what we do, we don't actually, put money on the table. We don't put lots of money in there on the table. We just get the right team together, give them a problem that needs to be solved, give them something that we want them to actually come up with a solution for. And because they haven't got that big, massive R&D budget here, they've actually got to be more creative. They've actually got to think through the problem there as well. Because I think the danger sometimes is when you've got lots of money to tap into, your brain goes lazy and you look for ways to actually solve a solution, when actually what you should be doing is you're doing it on the minimum level, you should do it at minimum spend. So therefore, that actually having too much money can actually be as counterproductive as not having enough money.
Yeah, and if you study the great creatives in any sector, whether it's architecture, design, entrepreneurship, constraints force us to be more creative, and we come up with different solutions that might be better than just slinging a load of money at something. And I think that's a really important thing. And one of the creative questions I think we can all ask ourselves when we're sort of planning and thinking about how much money we might need is to use the exaggeration technique, which is what would I do if I had to do this and only and half the cost? How would I do it? And because that helps you prioritize what's super important, but also asking yourself, if I had £1 million to spend, for instance, on this, how would I spend that? Or insert significant number of choice that's significant to you, because you might not be able to or even want to spend that amount of money, but it might give you some ideas of some bigger thinking that you can do. So I think it's about being efficient and having some big ideas in there as well, and getting that balance right between the two. So let's get into the real sort of grit of the show, because we like to get into things properly, don't we? We're not about fluff and sort of soft type thing. It was straight into what matters. So finance for growth. Last week we talked about how to get the best out of your accountant, and this is one area as well where you can really leverage your accountant's expertise, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think the first start point, before you actually start to look where you get the funding from, and we've mentioned external funding, by the way, but there are lots of opportunities to business to access funding internally. There's actually a lot of money tied up in their businesses, which I'll comment in a moment. The first thing that your accountant can help you with is to articulate and get a cash flow plan. Once you've got a cash flow plan and you say, this is what my business financial plan looks like, then you know what you need, how much you need it, when you need it. You can play around with options. So I think that's the first thing that I would call my accountant to help with, and actually to produce a cash plan for the future. And then you can decide, how are you going to fund those shortfalls or this, etc.
Because you can play around with phasing. You can buy certain bits and pieces a bit later or get some payments in earlier. There are things that you can play around with. And I think it's better to do that cash flow forecast as early on as you can in your idea, so that if you do know there's a time when you're definitely going to need some money, you can start to think about what's the most cost effective way of getting that money and funding the funding, if that makes sense. And
I'd probably actually do that very early on in the cycle, because I think out the options, in terms of funding, whether your accountant is going to help you evaluate the impact of leasing, using internally generated funds, having a big movement in terms of getting that money accelerated through your company through customer accounts much better. Those are things that I can actually help you build and structure, as well as knowing where the pots of money are and what you should go for, what the application processes are. And believe it or not, nowadays compared to 25 years ago, there is more opportunity to access funding. And again, I'm not saying getting funding is easy, but it's actually easier than people think it is.
Yeah. So we'll go back to the internal funding, and then I'll park the question I was going to ask for later. But what else can a business do in terms of, you said that money's tied up in different places? Might that be stock or what? How can they unleash some of the tied up investment and get that out to do other things? What might some ways be?
Okay, well, I look at the three components that make up the engine of where your money gets circulated from. So if you are a retailer or a manufacturer, you've got money tied up in your inventory. So what you need to do is to actually look at your stats, look at your systems, and ask yourself, how long does it take for that inventory to turn back into cash? So are there things you can do to accelerate the movement? Are you overbuying stock? Are you managing that stock effectively? So that's one source. Getting that asset out the door as quickly as possible is one thing you can do. The other area of untapped, which applies to all businesses pretty much, unless you're a purely cash business, is your customer accounts. So you might give your customers typically 30 days to pay their bills. My experience is that most customers do not pay their bills on time for a number of reasons. Okay, you may have 80% paying on time, but you may have a percentage that pays late. Every day that's late is you're ending up financing that person's business there as well. So are there things you can do? And there are lots of things you can do which are relatively light touch to accelerate the cash from invoicing to your customers. And the last one is suppliers. And again, I just exercise a note of caution, by the way. Lots of companies that have cash flow problems or want to generate more cash, they sit on their suppliers and they take longer to pay the suppliers. It's dangerous because if you upset that relationship too much, suppliers withdraw their supplies and you're slightly buggered. So, but that's where you need to look at closely. Are you managing your working capital, as effectively as you can be? Yeah.
And I mean, I think some of these things are good practice anyway. So if you're running, a lean, efficient financial machine and you're close to your numbers, you'll be on top of that stuff anyway, because stock is just cash sitting on a shelf. And really, we should, all businesses should be running as low as possible in stock, maybe overstocked on a few critical items that could stop production or could stop trade. If you can't get hold of them for any reason. Likewise, managing suppliers, supplier payments, and invoicing and cash collection. So it's really good business practice anyway, but just dialed up a notch, isn't it?
Turn it up,
with a view to the future. Okay, and so that's how things might be funded internally. What do you think about borrowing money from friends and family?
I've got mixed feelings there. I have to say, on balance, I'm not in favour, but that's more of a personal thing here for a number of reasons. If you're borrowing money from people that you actually know on a personal level, unfortunately, my experience is such that if it's not conducted correctly and professionally, that actually can cause quite a friction, quite a pressure on that relationship. So don't get me wrong, there's lots of family companies that work very successfully. They borrow money from each other and it works for them. As a general rule of thumb, I say not. However, I know many people who do it successfully. But if you're going to do that, I would say treat it as though it's a professional loan, i.e. make sure you document it, not because it's trust, but so people have got clarity. Make sure you honour it and make sure you respect that relationship and you actually pay it back to them. Don't go on holiday when you haven't paid back your friend. Don't go off, enjoying yourself when actually your friends and your family have been waiting to get their money paid back.
Yeah, because that's what causes dissent, isn't it? When people see one thing and they think, well, I've just given you or lent you all that money rather. But I think you're right in terms of the family businesses and some of the multi-generational that I've worked with. It's done professionally and everybody's got a business mindset and a business attitude about it. It's when probably great Aunt Bertha, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's actually great that the families want to give people a good start, but it's also when they start to become shareholders and have an involvement and maybe they don't understand the space. So you're right, it's about really thinking through the relationship and setting it up on a professional basis. So what about then sort of selling shares?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, that. And I think it comes back to that question about, for me, if you know what you need the funding for, that's the first key question. So if it's, for example, you need it for asset purchases, have you explored the options like leasing? Have you explored the options like renting? Have you explored the options of X? If you need an injection of cash because you're going on a market expansion, there's two or three things you've got to think about. Generally speaking, you can either borrow the money or you can actually issue shares. Now, the thing about shares is you might have a mindset that says, I'm fixated of having 100% of the company. If you start to give shares to somebody, two things. One, unless you're a PLC, there's an element of risk that investor takes on. Secondly, you've got to accept that investor may want to have a more direct hands-on involvement in running your business. You may still have majority shareholding, but you're going to be able to share that and get used to somebody else contributing ideas and thoughts. There are people who invest passively, but most investors these days, whether they're angel investors, venture capitalists, will want some say to make sure their money is well safeguarded. So yeah, I mean, it can work. I think you've got to think about what level of control. Are you fixated? Are you happy to other people to come in to your business and say, we're going to do X or Y or suggest this? But also, if the money's only for short term, you're giving away potentially long-term value for a short-term fix. And therefore, you might be better off actually financing that through debt.
So, but you can think about your exit strategy. So maybe that when the investment's paid back or the company reaches a certain level, then automatically, the investor gets a payout and the shares are returned back to you. So, that you can set it up so you can get a good exit strategy with different arrangements, I think, and clever planning and working together.
100%. And what I would say, sorry, Joe, I go from a client of mine who just went through the same process over the last week or two, literally the same situation, growing company, debating about whether to take on somebody with an equity investment. The decision was made that it would be a good thing, because not only was she getting the cash injection, which wasn't really the key thing, but it was actually getting access to additional expertise to lighten the leadership role, to lighten the management role there as well. So for the shareholding, she was giving away, she was actually getting something else that was going to contribute to her sharing the responsibility, sharing the load, and access to more skill sets as well.
Yeah, because 100% of not much return is still not much, but you might give up some of that equity and have a bigger piece of the pie, which gives you more money overall. So it's a balancing act. I think, really. And what about when people invest in businesses, and you see it on Dragon's Den and all that sort of stuff, and they ask about, they say things like, well, the valuation of the company is this, and therefore this is the return you're going to get on your investment. So tell us about what all of that lingo and language, I should say, rather, jargon means.
So generally speaking, when people value companies, what they're actually valuing is for something called this weird thing called goodwill. So if you visualize a business that's got things like money in the bank, inventory, bricks and mortar, if I said, let me liquidate the company tomorrow, what's it worth? It's worth maybe 25 grand or whatever. Now, what it's saying is I can either start my business from scratch and build it up over time, or I can just buy into a business that's already there, it's already established. And what I'm actually buying into ultimately is the future profits that business can make. And now there are about half a dozen, 8 methods of coming up with a number, evaluation, but it's purely an initial bargaining conversation, because value is based on how much the buyer wants to buy you and how much you want to sell them. And typically I'll say, right, I'm taking over your business. If I'm the buyer, I'm going to say, well, actually, you're overvaluing it, because if I have me coming in, I've got to spend more money on staff. You haven't got enough money injected there. I'm going to say, well, actually, if you take it over, you can improve the profit margins. So effectively, you're basically buying a business that's established, and we're having a conversation about goodwill, basically.
So, and that's debated partly because it's negotiation, but
yeah, absolutely.
I think also entrepreneurs can be quite overly optimistic about future projections and valuations and stuff. So what are some tips you would give if anybody's thinking about going down that route?
Well, as the entrepreneur trying to sell the shares, or as the buyer?
Yes, as the entrepreneur.
As the entrepreneur, ultimately, and I was thinking actually the Dutch tulip company suddenly came to mind in terms of that sort of that big bankruptcy that happened in the 17th century, I think it was. Ultimately, what you're doing is if you haven't got a track record, realistically, what you're selling to somebody is an aspiration and a dream of something that may happen. The realistic business value is going to be very minor. So if you've got no prototype, if you've got no testing, if you've got no proof of concept, the values you're likely to get is going to be quite minimal. Because what somebody is doing is to say, I'm buying something that you haven't even proved can work. I'm buying something that you haven't told me, if there are real margins. All you've got is a document telling me what the theoretical profitability is. Now, for me, personal view, I would say, if I'm an entrepreneur looking to maximize the value of my equity, I'd get it out there, get an audience, get a proof of concept, do that minimum viable product there, get some returns, get some stats, because that way it's easy. It's a much stronger conversation to say, I'm going to sell you X of my business, and basically, look, here's the stats. I've sold it. It's a proof of concept. Customers love it. I've got a loyal following. So basically, you coming in is only going to enhance that value, and therefore that's likely to actually generate more money from your equity investor.
Yeah, and when people are investing and trying to grow their business and accelerate their business growth, so that in 3-5 years they can sell it on. What considerations in terms of investment and funding for growth of those business ideas for acceleration should people be thinking about?
Well, if you're talking about upscaling here, then you might need a different level of funding. You might need a couple of options here. So you've got to, I suppose it depends where you want to take the business. So if you're upscaling it, you need money for longer term investment. You need money to make sure you've got good infrastructure there as well. You need to actually gear that up. And I would say, I'm just going to throw in a few opportunities, by the way, for people to look for if they're thinking, where do I get these magic funds for? Your local LEPs, things like business accelerators. I think they're about 100.
Hang on. So LEP is local enterprise partnership.
The local enterprise.
There are 30 odd, one per region around the country, and they've got a growth hub, which is funded by the LEP, Local Enterprise Partnership. So Google Local Enterprise Partnership near me, and it will all come up. Growth hub near me, and that will come up as well in Google.
And I take it for your LEP where you are then, Jo, does it have also the access to funding opportunities and? Yeah,
so there's York and North Yorkshire, Leeds City region and others. So yes, they do fund, but also they fund training and courses and programs and digital development, all sorts of different things. So and that varies from region to region in terms of because they get the money in the funding to help the businesses with the local priorities for growth and the local opportunities for growth. So it's just really well worthwhile going to see what's available. Yeah.
That's a good one.
Yeah. And for instance, PAPI, which is product and process innovation, has some significant. Sometimes you need to put in some money as well. So with some grants and things that you can get, like the PAPI grant, product and process innovation grant, you've got to put a bit of money in yourself as well.
Which isn't a bad thing, actually.
No,
the whole
it's
cliche
not.
about skin in the game means that you're committed to it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's if you're getting money to grow your business and it's not on a repayment basis particularly, then I think it's really important that you demonstrate some commitment to investment as well. Anyway, so local enterprise partnerships, growth hubs can point you in the right direction.
A few other things. Business accelerators. So they're typically, there's about 180 plus in the UK at the moment, and they're a similar thing to the LEP in terms of there's money on the table. There's training opportunities, there's networking. Again, if you just type in business accelerator into Mr. Google, you'll see the list near your region. You've got things like business angels. I don't think they've got any wings necessarily connected to their backs.
So this is what we hear a lot of this term, an angel investor or a business angel. So what exactly are they, and how do you find one?
Well, again, usual thing, there'll be organisations. So if you just type in angel investor, you'll have loads of them. And basically what they do, they've got money, they've got expertise, depending on the size of the angel investor, because some people like to call themselves angel investors, but they just might have spare cash. The real robust ones will have access to a team of experts. They will have money on the table, and the level of risk they're prepared to take tends to be much higher than it might be for, say, a bank or a normal investor as such there as well.
Yeah. So when you talk about the level of risk, sometimes just because your business might be a limited company, you can still be asked to underwrite
100%, yeah.
Give a personal commitment, a personal guarantee on a loan or investment for your business, can't you?
Yeah, and typically I think most banks will these days, or most lenders will say, we want the directors to give us a personal undertaking that if it all goes wrong, that they'll step into those shoes there as well. But again, it comes back to that risk. Asian investor may take a high level of risk, but obviously they want a bigger return and a bigger slice of the pie as a result.
Yeah. So what about banks? What are banks really looking for? Are banks a good, safe bet for an inward investment into a business, or are they problematic, or somewhere in between? And what are they looking for?
Right, the banks are going to be looking for a very similar thing. What I would say, what I've noticed with the banking sector, I think certainly the established high street banks are, and I'm going to generalise, nothing to do with Apple stores or anything of this nature, across the board, is that banks are much more what I call cautious lenders these days. So because they're under the spotlight, they go through more due diligence, but they put a lot more obstacles, and the process is quite slow, relatively speaking. Obviously, if you're a bank out there and you don't agree with that, please do tell me in the comments box, me and Joe, where that's wrong. But most banks for traditional high street, they're much slower. The procedures are more bureaucratic. Obviously, COVID's had an effect on that, but I think they were quite challenging at the best of times anyway. But they are a source. You may have a relationship of some description with the banks. They know you. They can see what's going on. They can have access to other forms of funding and finance overseas, invoice factoring, all those sorts of things. And mostly the invoice factoring houses, which basically gives you money against your invoices, tends to be owned by the banks as well. But yeah, they're a source, so it's worth exploring it. I personally speaking would not necessarily say that would be my first port of call. Okay,
so we've got angel invest. Well, we've got funding it yourself. We've got friends and family, or other people that we know. Presumably they'd be a friend if they're not family. We've got angel investors, banks, funding and grants from, where you might have to do some match funding or some part funding of things. I think just one thing on banks as well, it's about choosing the right bank. So, I'd love to hear everybody's experiences on this, because I get so many people saying to me, well, actually, I'm just dealing with somebody in a call center who's doing the best job they can, but they're reading from a script and they don't understand the business. And it's just some sort of algorithm that's deciding what's best for my business. There's nobody really there to talk to. So finding the right bank and the right person in the bank, if you go down that route, I think is really important. So what other options are? We've also got people investing in terms of buying shares. What else? Is there anything else that people could do?
Yeah, I can probably better. No, let's have a think. We can do things like there's specialized funding organizations. I'm just going to mention, I'm not saying these are the only shows in town. So things like Funding Circle, effectively that's peer-to-peer lending. So typically the way the model works, they take money from businesses and individuals. They've got people who want to borrow that money, and they chop that loan up into slices, and the investors provide that money. So it's typically peer-to-peer lending. The risks, it tends to be okay, affordable. Everything comes back to the level of risk. You can also do crowdfunding, by the way. That's becoming more and more popular, where you can literally provide your offer on a crowdfunding platform. You can offer equity in return for that money. So that's, again, another source. If you're finding that's difficult. Most people will probably use these options, by the way, Joe. What I would say is that maybe their proposition's not that strong. Maybe they're just trying something different in terms of what they're giving away.
Or it depends. I mean, I know there's some very strong brands that have grown well. So there's a vegan sort of fresh cooked / frozen ready meal brand called All Plants. And I believe, I need probably to check this out, but I believe they've used crowdfunding. When there's a cause that people want to get behind, and some of the benefits, not in the case of All Plants, but in others, are in if you invest, even if it's a small amount, you'll be one of the first ones to get the prototype product or the new product. So there are creative ways about thinking about the return that the investor gets. It doesn't all have to be equity. I think as well, from what I understand, it's not something I've done directly myself, but with clients who they've had to put a lot of work into actually marketing on the crowdfunding platform, and investing to get a higher ranking, putting a lot of effort into the whole campaign for it to be worthwhile. So you don't just stick it on the internet and people will offer you money. There's a whole heap of work that goes into it behind the scenes if it's going to be successful. But it's a really fantastic, alternative way of thinking about things.
Yeah, and it's a great way, I suppose, to actually start building up your profile, building up your brand, building up the message there, and it also attracted money. But again, it's a lot of effort. And if you've got the time, you've got a clear message, if you want to start building up a tribe, a community, it's a great way to do that, as well as actually access funds.
Yeah. And as you say, it's a good way of testing things as well. As an alternative is to take pre-orders for something. So, as long as you've got a good prototype that works, ask people to pre-order and prepay, and then you can manufacture or produce or provide once those pre-orders are in and the cash is in to fund that. So as long as you make sure you do, deliver for people or give them the money back, you've got to follow through on that promise, of course. So there's lots of different options there, really. And growing and cash flow are probably a couple of the greatest stressors that I see for entrepreneurs, and I don't know if it's the same for what you see as well. They worry about money and take money personally and take the performance of the business personally, because we're so emotionally invested in what we're doing and we care. So it's really about using great advice and exploring different things and finding the right solution for you, isn't it? Because everybody's different. Yeah,
I certainly in businesses, look, people in business, as they do in life, think about money. They talk about money, they plan what they're going to do when they have money, but they don't always necessarily look at the money in their businesses. They don't actually look at those numbers. They don't actually necessarily get a deep dive and see what's going on. And I know we keep saying planning, which I think we do it for a good reason. We talk about cash flows, and we do it for a good reason. Having that idea of what lies ahead more than the next week here is great for your well-being, and we're in Mental Health Awareness Week, by the way. So
we are.
It is actually phenomenal for well-being. Knowing, have a better understanding about what you need, when you need it, why you need it, is better than trying to second guess what you think might lie ahead. It gives you better clarity, it cuts down the risk, it proves credibility to yourself and your funder. But you need to think about clearly what you need, why you need it, how you're going to spend it, and then cater that to your risk appetite. And there are lots of opportunities and options out there to access funding.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, there's loads there. I mean, you're awesome. And I know we could talk about this at length because you've got such deep knowledge. And I know that you've been a real asset to all our Business Growth Club members who've benefited from all those insights, that wisdom and that experience as well. So thank you very much for sharing that with us. Yeah, and I think, there's lots to think about there, but growth is important. Now's a really good time. Things are opening up again. It feels like hopefully we're on the road to recovery, generally economic as well as pandemic, and so on. So I'm sure we're all thinking about how we go for growth. And Richard's got a comment here for us. When looking for cash injection for growth, should you look for a long or short time scale to pay back? I didn't get my teeth in. Should we look for a long or short time scale to pay back? Great question. Love the question. What do you think, Mahmood?
I think it comes back to a classic response from any finance person. It really depends. So if you've got this idea what your cash flow for, so I personally speaking would ideally do a 2-year projection. Obviously less accurate in the second year here. And then you've got to ask yourself is, if I took the cash back and I went back much more quickly, paid it back more quickly, will that put me in a precarious situation on the next 12 months thereafter? If it does, then I would be more cautious and give yourself time. So maybe a little bit longer so you can see how things are stabilizing, how things are settling down. And then you'll always have the option, depending on the type of funding you've taken, to pay back early. And bounce back loan is a classic example for me. Lots of people who took out bounce back loans were saying, should I pay it back? My view was, if you're not 100% certain about what lies ahead, then hang on to it for another year, because the cost of the servicing the debt is not that excessive. Mm-hmm. You've got the option to repay back early without any penalties. And once you've got a bit more clarity about how the future's unfolding, then you might feel more comfortable paying it back much earlier.
Yeah. I mean, because once you sign up to a payback scheme, that's a contractual commitment. So go with what you can afford. Make sure you negotiate, or in your deal that you eventually settle for, you have the opportunity to pay that back early without any significant penalty. And if you choose to pay it early because you can, then that works out great, doesn't it? I love the question. Great question. Yeah, thank you. So I think that's us for this week, isn't it, Mahmood?
It is indeed. I mean, I would say you made a great point, Joe, about the growth and the pain. Two things. The growth can be counterproductive if it's not managed correctly. And the thing about growth is, especially companies that grow very quickly, they don't invest enough in what I call their working capital, the infrastructure. And therefore, that has a massive cash drain. And therefore, I've seen many businesses go under. They've actually grown quickly, making profits, but they actually run out of cash too quickly because they haven't thought about that next level of growth. Yeah.
And sometimes we can be so busy chasing, the next bit of business that we've not got our eye on what's actually going behind the business cash wise. So really important. Richard's given you a thumbs up as well for that that response. So thank you, Richard.
Yeah, good to see you back.
So we will be back same time, same place next week. With a different theme. If there's anything you'd like us to cover in these shows, do let us know, because all of these themes are, have come from things that we have been asked to do and asked to talk about and cover, and we're here for you to answer your questions. So, are you going to take us out?
I am indeed. So listen, hope you got some value from this show, folks. So obviously, any comments, questions, put them in the chat box. Head over to the Mahmood and Jo website, by the way. So we're proud of it. It's growing. If you want to sign up for our newsletter, you can keep in touch. That'll be really useful. We'd love you to do that. Easy to remember, name Mahmood and Jo. Obviously, hopefully you can tell us apart. And until then, you have a fantastic week ahead, and we look forward to seeing you guys next week.
See you soon. Bye.
See you soon. Let's see if we can find this. We've got to.
Hi there, welcome to today's Business Growth Club show. We are so pleased to have you here. The theme is growth marketing.
We're talking about actions and consequences today.
It's all about purpose.
Driving business growth with using KPIs.
We're talking money mindset.
The Growth Club, I mean, not to oversell it, but it's so well organised. So yeah, it was totally invaluable.
The Growth Club, coupled alongside with the masters that I'm doing at strategic leadership at the moment, both of those things happening collectively have definitely transformed, and the Growth Club did have a massive impact for our business.
What is it that attracted you to come to the Growth Club in the first place? Let me just start off with that.
Well, because it was the two of you, basically.